Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. We are going to kick off the afternoon session with a topic that's been mentioned throughout the last day and a half, and that is the Metaverse. And we have three experts, really four experts joining us here to go through sort of the ins and outs of how it's going to work and why this time it's going to be different. So please join me in welcoming Sophia from Citi, who is going to be our moderator. Sophia.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay. I'll leave it in your hands.
Thank you. Are we all sitting in the right place under our names? Yes, we are. Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I will tell you a little bit about myself, where I work, and why we are interested in the Metaverse. And then I will hand over to my panelists, who will introduce themselves and who will also tell you a little bit about from what perspective they're coming from when they look at the Metaverse, just to set the scene. So I work for Citibank. I'm based in London, in Canary Wharf, and I work for Citi's thought leadership division called Citi Global Insights. And within that division, I work for the Future of Finance team. So we look at all sorts of trends that we think are going to impact the future of our industry, not necessarily next year or in 2 years' time, but more into the future, 5 years and 10 years' time. And that is why we looked at the Metaverse. It is a topic we have done a deep dive on. In fact, we published a rather large report on it. I say large because of the number of pages. It's over 180 pages, and it touches all sorts of aspects of the Metaverse. We published this at the end of March. It is available to download on the internet if anybody is interested. If you type in Citi, Metaverse, and money into your browser of choice, I assure you it's the first report that's going to come up. And we have been researching the topic because we want to be aware of what's happening, because our corporate clients are building in this space, be that technology companies, chip manufacturers, cloud providers, entertainment companies, media companies, fashion companies. Everybody's trying to understand and dimension what it means for them, and they're thinking about how to build for it. And we expect commercial transactions, more and more of them, to move into this space eventually, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and we need to be able to facilitate those transactions in the same way we do so today, digitally and online. So that's why we're interested in it. We see it as a major investment opportunity for our investor clients, and also an opportunity to potentially deploy the Metaverse ourselves for our own applications. And with that, I will hand over to Jehangir. Please introduce yourself and your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jehangir. I'm at Lloyds Banking Group, and I lead a little team looking at emerging technologies that can unlock new propositions or transform the business model of banking. And it's very much through that sort of lens where I think Web3 and ideas like the Metaverse really come in. Much like yourself, we look at things on a sort of 3-horizon model. And certainly those sort of Horizon 2, Horizon 3 ideas, those coming in the next 5 to 10 years are the ones where we can have the most impact and influence then the roadmap and direction of the bank. And so, yeah, it's a space that we've been looking at over the recent months as we start to see some activity both by consumers and businesses alike.
Thank you. Pavel?
Hello, everyone. My name is Pavel Matveev. I'm co-CEO of Wirex. Wirex is a crypto-native banking app with 5 million customers around the globe. And we've been working with digital assets for maybe 6-7 years. So we're quite excited that Web3 and Metaverse are getting more and more popular nowadays. But in terms of what we're doing in Metaverse, we do quite a lot. We have a set of products which provide easy access for people to Web3. Without seed phrases, without private keys, without all this unnecessary complexity. And yeah, we do a lot with digital assets. We make digital assets spendable. We operate with NFTs as well. We allow people to send, receive, and store them securely. So yeah, quite excited about Metaverse, about Web3. We see this as a great opportunity for us as a company. Yeah.
Thank you. Haydn.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. So Haydn Jones, so I lead the digital assets practice for PwC UK. As a business, professional services business, I'm very pleased to say that we've spent the last 3 years building out a capability that services pretty much any sort of asset class within the digital asset space. So we'll run from NFTs all the way through to CBDCs, stopping off at DeFi. So we can cover that. We can cover tax. We can cover consulting, deals, risk, audit. Okay, and then we cover the whole ecosystem from a digital assets perspective. So we'll do custodians, wallet providers, issuers, exchanges, and we work with regulators. What's been very interesting over the last probably 2.5, 3 years now, we, as a professional services business, we have always been fairly innovative in the way that we invest. So we had a drones business, we had AR, VR, we had blockchain capability, and obviously 3 years ago, nascent digital assets capability. What's been very interesting is to see the way our AR, VR colleagues have effectively found this hook around Web3 and the Metaverse. And what we're seeing now is this sort of pull through around blockchain and digital assets as the pipe work that's going to drive the way the Metaverse operates. So, this is becoming an increasingly important part of the business. So we will partner with our Meta colleagues in terms of creating a business proposition, actually understanding the regulatory, legal, tax risks, as well as the operational compliance risks associated with standing up capability in the Metaverse. So it's a hugely fascinating space to be in, and an absolute pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So let's just level set, because the Metaverse, it's a term that many use. We, in fact, for our own report, interviewed so many different experts and asked them all the same question. What does it actually mean? And everybody had a different answer. So my first question to you guys, just to level set, and anybody can take this, is what do we actually mean when we use the word Metaverse? Is this just about AR, VR?
No,
what is it?
It's far more, right? It's very nascent, so it doesn't exist yet, which makes it hard to define. So if we try and start with a succinct definition, it's going to be wrong, but at least it gives us a starter for 10. So it's something about the intertwining of real and virtual worlds. So we can talk about what does it mean to be immersed, and do you really need a headset or not? But then along with that intertwining of real and virtual worlds, it's something about the fact you're going to not just play games there. So yep, you're gonna do some of your leisure, but you're gonna earn as well, and you're gonna spend, you're gonna live there, and you're gonna work there. So it needs to encompass a broad range of usual activity, but do it in a way that's gonna feel different, because it's augmenting that real world, that what people often call the IRL, the in real life aspect, with this virtual aspect. I think that's going to feel quite different than it does today. And then we can unpack exactly what that means and why it's not just about gaming, I think, as we go along.
Okay, so now that we have a definition, I guess my next question is, but what does it bring to the table? And I find this one a really difficult one to answer, also when I get asked it on panels. What is the value add? What does this bring to the table? Who would like to take that?
It's frictional cost. It's frictional cost.
Right, tell us about that.
So, if you think about, so UK GDP is about $2.7 trillion or thereabouts. A commercial transaction has a payment. We have ledger, we have a contract, and we have some kind of banking infrastructure, some kind of store of value. So if we have a commercial contract, Sophia, we engage in a commercial contract of some kind, there's a frictional cost associated with that commercial transaction. The premise of blockchain and platforms such as Ethereum, Polygon, Solana is to be able to automate commercial transactions. So we can publish a smart contract. We can agree that smart contract executes when a set of conditions are met. You get paid, I get my services. That's frictional cost, okay? With blockchain technology, we get 4 for 1, right? The problem with that is that we still have to deploy that over internet-type interfaces, right? The opportunity within the metaverse to be able to take lots of frictional cost associated with things like commercial transactions, but also, and I was on the tube yesterday, and I think there was a Meta advert that I was looking at, and Meta were talking about training surgeons in the metaverse. So think about the frictional cost of bringing 30 surgeons together from around the world and putting them into an operating theatre so they can learn how to operate in a particular patient scenario. So for me, this is all about frictional cost, taking frictional cost out of the economy, whether it be commercial transactions, whether it be physical interactions, whether it be marketing and advertising. All of that can be compressed into code, which is really very cheap to create.
So that programmability and that tokenization, I think, is really powerful. What I'm less clear on, Haydn, some of us doing your job here, is that element of what then constitutes. Many AR, VR companies have just rebadged themselves metaverse companies, as it's in the zeitgeist at the moment. So are those really useful training use cases for VR, metaverse use cases, or are they just VR use cases, adding value, fair value exchange for the sellers of that software and the hardware, to the hospitals, to the military use cases where it's adding a lot of value? Any of those high-risk training situations now make a lot of sense in VR. What makes them metaverse?
I think we can't knock innovation, okay? Because every journey starts with some very small steps. The primitive. I mean, it's 100 years anniversary of the BBC, I think, today. And you go back and you look at the early sort of radio transmitters that were there, and the different companies that jumped on the bandwagon. And incidentally, that's how the BBC was formed, because they brought these companies that jumped on the bandwagon, and they brought them all together to create the BBC. But they were seeing exactly that same kind of evolution in the way these companies are coming together. And what we see now might be a bit clunky. It might involve these big things that we have to put on our faces. But for me, and I haven't got my glasses on, but for me, I sort of talk about, I touch my glasses, and I can be able to look at the entire audience, and I can see LinkedIn profiles floating above them. I can see the degrees of separation. I can see client relationships that we have in the room, social relationships, and all of that will be possible when we iron out some of the sort of these residual technical issues, which we'll get through. But yeah, I mean, it's a hugely exciting space to be in.
Pavel, it looks like you want to say something. Where's the value add for you?
Well, I have slightly different view on Metaverse. So from my perspective, Metaverse is less about VR and virtual reality, is more about the data ownership. And I think Metaverse context is about next evolution of the internet, which is called Web3. And I think data ownership plays a big role in is this kind of next evolution in Web3. So from my perspective, when end users own the data, I think it opens quite a lot of use cases and a lot of possibilities in terms of exchange in value, in terms of P2P relationship and these sort of things. But I do agree with the friction, and that Metaverse just simplifies this. Yeah.
So let me pick up on 2 points then and go off script that you both actually mentioned. Haydn, you touched on blockchain, and Pavel, you talked about Web3. So I suppose my very direct question to you is, so are you saying we need blockchain for the metaverse? And Pavel, to you, are you saying there is only a Web3 version of the metaverse, or is the metaverse a whole different kaleidoscope? Will there be different metaverses, including the one that will be built by Meta, Apple, and the more centralized walled garden metaverse? Your views?
Who goes first? The premise for blockchain stems from, and I think most people would probably agree with me, is Bitcoin. Okay, so Bitcoin is exposed to the threat, vulnerabilities from 7 billion people every day. Okay, it's open source. It's been running for 13 years. A blockchain is all about concatenating sets of transactions together in such a way that if you want to change a set of transactions, you've got to change the previous block. You've got to change the previous block. So the premise for a blockchain-based protocol is the fact that you effectively don't have a firewall and it's exposed to lots of threat, okay? As soon as you start erecting firewalls, the argument for blockchain, I would say, diminishes because there's other forms of, you know, cryptography that come into play that allow us to build things which are secure. As it stands at the moment, blockchain technologies, and I think at the latest count, there's probably about 21,300 cryptocurrencies out there. Not all of which are blockchain-based, I would hasten to add. But they're highly accessible. It's a highly accessible technology which allows trust to operate in a manner which is secure. So I'd argue that, you know, we have this technology on demand. It's relatively easy to integrate with, you know, in the context of a metaverse type environment. It still has, you know, at the risk of being controversial, I'd say that the challenge with, you know, some of the protocols is the fact that there needs some sort of state emanation that provides a level of resilience, which I think is where we start getting into the territory of things like regulation. Because if a big protocol fails, you know, the people that actually look after our money systems aren't necessarily going to step in and save them, okay? And I think, you know, people do bad things with money. Money is really important. It's important that we operate it properly. So I think it is a highly accessible technology. It is highly secure. So I'd put money on that as being, and we can do lots of other stuff with it because you can plug identity in there. You can plug, you know, where stuff has come from. You can plug money in it. You can plug commitment in there. So it's a very, very flexible, come back to the programming point, it's a very flexible technology that I think is well suited to this new type of environment.
Thank you. And Pavel, on the Web3 point.
So in my view, Web3 and Metaverse are strongly connected. And again, there are different definitions of Metaverse. And I think every company is just trying to understand it differently and use it as a, you know, marketing tool. But in my view, you know, if Facebook develop VR universes, it will be, you know, Facebook in virtual reality. It won't be Metaverse. So that's why I think Web3 and Metaverse and data ownership, they just, you know, coexist. They should be together. Multiple blockchains, multiple cryptocurrencies. So I do think there will be different chains interacting with each other, different universes, which will be part of a Web3. And in my view, I use the equal sign between Metaverse and Web3. So they, you know, closely connected in my view.
Okay, that's interesting. And Jehangir, if I can turn to you, just to continue on the Web3 point, what does a Web3-powered metaverse stack encompass? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth building on what the others have just said, right? So when you look at the earliest definition of the metaverse in Snow Crash, we look at the start of the movie Ready Player One, we look at what Meta is saying, these are centralized, arguably dystopian views of where the world can end up. So why is it that all three of us on the panel think there needs to be a bit more decentralization here? Why is it we're saying Web3 is powerful? It's because it's bringing certain capabilities to the table. One's around that programmability and tokenization, as Haydn was saying. One is around the data sovereignty and data control and ownership that Pavel was talking about. So we're starting to see some of those elements that we want Web3 to be bringing to the table. Whether that means in a fully permissionless at every level, so do we actually mean it's likely to be with crypto? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe for mainstream adoption, you'll need some kind of regulated stablecoin so that the mass market feel comfortable, so your little corner shop feels comfortable. But that doesn't mean you can't embrace some of that programmability of the money, programmability of the business transactions themselves, the other side of that transaction. So there's a lot, and I think Haydn used a lovely sort of terminology there around breaking down that walled garden, taking away the firewall. So when you think about those sorts of what in Web3 we call decentralized apps, dApps. When you want to build a business process that is now going to run without the need to have an intermediary or a single trusted party, I think it actually allows a lot of these new marketplace and ecosystem business models that a lot of corporates keep talking about actually to flourish. And I think that's why sort of Web3 can actually start to address some of those pain points that we've been talking about.
Thank you. And I think this is the perfect time to actually address one of the questions that we've received on Slido, given everything we've just talked about. I'm going to read it out. How can the metaverse scale without interoperable ID and self-sovereign privacy embedded? Question mark. Can it even scale without these things?
It can't. It can't. And we need a fundamentally different way of thinking about identity and store of value things. And by that I mean both Bitcoin and fiat and other things which we can attribute value to. But also other credentials that are attached with me. So at the moment, my credentials are spread out across different things. Okay, so I have a safe at home that's got my academic certificates in it. I've got my banks, which sit on an app. I've got my health certifications. I've got my passport. I've got my driving license. All of those things are all spread out all over the place. Okay, and it's a mix of physical stuff and it's a mix of electronic stuff. What we need is a one-stop shop for the stuff that identifies me, that is attributable to me, that can be interfaced to things that are digital, that I can turn up in a meta world, and it's immediately apparent that I am the person that I am, and that could be through the sound of my voice, it could be through my eyes, it could be the way my face is constructed. And then that immediately gives people access to these different certificates. Now, it's interesting because banking at the moment kind of does a bit of that, but I think with some imagination, the way banks could change is that they can actually become the vehicles for all of these different credentials, and because I think there is a new role for the banks in the future in terms of being able to allow the interoperability point to be addressed, but it's the standardization of the exchange of credentials, which I think is key to that.
And when you say the future of banks are for them to become the vehicle for credentials, let me pick up on that. Do you mean to become the custodian of the credentials, or do you mean that plus something else? Could you expand on that?
So, the way you think about the way banks have evolved, originally it was all about the custody of physical things, so gold and physical notes and,
We had safes.
Instruments, financial instruments. And then all of a sudden we discovered how to move money with messages. So the banks became software providers. And now where we've got to is that the miracle of store of value, that's transmissible on a shared ledger, that secret is now out of the box. So we can create things that do what banks do without the need for banks. So for me, the thing that is unique to banks is this security. They stand for security. So I have a series of data objects that are associated with me that can be digitized. For me, I look to these secure brands that have got lots of history that can leverage that security capability. So it allows me to have a seamless interaction in these environments.
And let's move on to use cases now. We've received a question, but also to talk about live use cases. I mean, Pavel, you mentioned in your introduction that you guys are already in the metaverse. And I know Haydn, PwC, is doing stuff in the metaverse too. So I guess to both of you, what are you doing in the metaverse right now? What is live now?
Okay, regarding use cases, I'll start with use cases where I think that which in my view will becoming more and more popular. So one of the use cases obviously is transfer and value or payment use case. I think it has huge potential with stablecoins, with CDBC, with other digital assets. And I think the next interesting use case, which is emerging use case, is decentralized social networks. If you're familiar with what Aave doing with the Lens protocol, I think this is how social networks will look like in very near future. And in terms of what Wirex doing as a company, so we, again, I started with saying that we see the Metaverse of Web3 as a huge opportunity for us. But right now, there are a lot of friction points for end users. Like, we keep talking about Metaverse, all these good things, and why actually people don't use it. There are a lot of friction points. You need to have the wallet, non-custodial wallet. You need to understand different blockchains. You need to have all these gas, native tokens, and so on and so forth. Right now, we're focusing on just making this access to Metaverse as easy as possible. So in this January, we launched the new product called Wirex Wallet. It's a non-custodial wallet which doesn't use seed phrases or private keys. It's an MPC technology. It's actually more secure and more user-friendly at the same time. So this is one of the things we're doing in Metaverse. We're providing the easy access for end users to Web3 in this particular case.
Okay, thank you. And Haydn, what's PwC doing in the Metaverse?
Well, I'll leave the highlight till last, okay, because it's interesting. But we've bought land in the Metaverse. So at the beginning of this year, we bought some land in Sandbox. We have supported at least 2 clients in buying land in the Metaverse, one of which is a regulator, which is quite interesting. I mean, we've got some very well-known brands coming into more London in the course of the next couple of weeks to actually experience our Metaverse environments that we've established. But most importantly, and this is what gets me paid every month, is we're doing VAT. So we've actually launched a product in relation to NFTs that allows the VAT footprint to be calculated around that as and when an NFT is issued. And people may think, well, that's kind of boring and all that kind of stuff, but there's 2 things which are certain in life, death and taxes, okay?
Charming.
Okay. You go back 7, 8 years ago and you look at the history of taxation in relation to crypto, HMRC 2014, they already had a framework for the taxation of crypto. So we have a lot of activity with clients in terms of understanding what is the tax footprint associated with activities in the Metaverse, which is it's important to be tax compliant because it's good to be a good citizen.
So the regulator that you helped buy land in the Metaverse, was that VARA, or what regulator was that?
It may well have been, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm provoking, but provoking is fun on a panel. So now let's talk a little bit about how money will move in the Metaverse. We've sort of touched on it and the different forms of money, and it's also in line with one of the questions we've received here. As we're thinking of moving value in the Metaverse and buying things in the Metaverse, what do you think is the dominant form of money? Is it going to be fiat, or is it going to be digital versions of fiat and or stablecoin, cryptos, or all of the above? What do you think?
So I think it needs to be a digital currency, right? So all the things we've been talking about, the great benefit of Web3 is that it's trying to bring the same sort of fluidity and logic to money that you can have today with other data objects. And for a whole other set of data objects, it's giving them that same capability, as Haydn was sort of saying. So it's going to be a digital currency. So then the question is it issued by a central bank? Is it issued by a third-party private company? And is it pegged or stable in some way? And I guess the word stable these days can
Questionable.
vary. Questionable, right? So, and that's where Libra started, right? What was Facebook trying to do? What was going on? They saw what was going on in China, right? With the likes of WeChat, the likes of Alibaba, and the fact that in their communities, WePay and Alipay actually offered essentially private stablecoin forms of yuan, right? That was very powerful. But it also told us something else, that it's unlikely for mainstream adoption, I think, that you'll see a free-floating cryptocurrency be that dominant form, because people will be confused by what's its value against what I'm doing elsewhere in my life. So I think it's likely to be something that is pegged to something they recognize, but it may not necessarily be issued by a central bank. It may get issued by a regulated bank, the way most commercial money is today.
Okay.
And because that's the other thing people need to remember, is that most money in the economy is debt. It's issued by commercial banks. When you take out a loan on Aave today, it's typically over-collateralized. They're looking at reducing that collateral requirement, but but it's still there. Whereas any of us can go into a bank and get an unsecured personal loan. Right? So it's just the issuance of debt. So it's likely to be a form of that, but it needs to come with that same digital capability. So it's likely to run on those blockchain rails that Haydn was talking about a second ago.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is a whole kaleidoscope of money.
I don't think any of them will disappear. I think you will see central banks issue CBDCs. I think there will be stable coins. They are today. There will be some that get regulated. Different jurisdictions will approach that at different speeds. Crypto is not going away, so all will exist. The question is, which is the dominant one? I think it's the one that gives consumers and merchants confidence. Which ones require the smallest amounts of cognitive load, back to those points of friction, so which have the smallest amounts to understand. Yeah. So at whatever it is these days, $20,000 for a Bitcoin, it makes more sense to actually denominate in Satoshis than it does Bitcoin, right? You can't, unless you're very rich, you can't buy everything in chunks of 20K or 60K when it's at its peak or whatever. So that doesn't work. So you need something that's easy to understand. And I think, therefore, it's likely to look similar to today's units, but in a digital form.
Pavel, Haydn, what do you think? Would you agree, or different forms of money for you? How do you think about it?
Definitely digital currency, in my view, it will be definitely stable currency. I don't think there will be one stable coin to rule them all, or CDBC. It will be a combination of central bank issued currency. I do think there is a big potential for over collateral stable coins as well, like DAI and similar ones. There are just three types of stable coins, right? Fiat-backed stable coins, over collateral stable coins, and UST, algo stable coins. Nobody wants to be algo stable coins right now, but definitely stable currency. I don't see Bitcoin being used as a payment, and I can share some insights. So Wirex is a company. We provide ability for our users to spend digital currency like everywhere. We're a Visa and MasterCard relationship. We issue Visa and MasterCard in different regions. But the thing is, I know Bitcoin maximalists, they like this use case when, hey, I pay with Bitcoin for something, that's cool. But the reality is that people don't spend crypto. The same way people don't spend gold, and people don't spend equity. People use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as investment. They can spend gains, but they actually don't pay with Bitcoin. So, and again, with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, there are just so many friction points for merchants. So I don't see merchant adoption coming anytime soon. I know there was a panel before that in the morning about the merchant crypto payments. I think it's such a long way to go. But stablecoins has a huge potential.
Okay. Haydn, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what the views expressed. I mean, for me, it's money technology, okay? You know, it's code that can be programmed to do things that relate to money, okay? So you look at the way the internet's evolved. We started off with some very early, you know, internet communication protocols, some very, very early sites. You know, you look at where we've ended up now, right? We've got 21,000 cryptocurrencies. That's the tip of the iceberg. You know, there will be, it's unlimited. And they will, you know, they will be born, they'll grow up, and they will die. Like in the same way that Nokia started out with Wellingtons and then went on to mobile phones. Each one of these protocols has got its own sort of evolutionary path. And some will continue and some will fade away, and then there'll be, you know, winners and losers along the way.
And as we're talking about moving value and the different forms of money and the monetary infrastructure, if you like, of the metaverse, I suppose my question is, do you see any enhanced risks if we're going to be using all these different types of money in the metaverse? In particular, do you see like an increase of AML risk, for example?
Well, I mean, so my colleagues work in financial crime. You know, I've acted as an expert witness in different, you know, criminal civil cases. You know, I've seen some pretty awful things that happen to people with money. Unfortunately, people do bad things with money. It doesn't matter whether it's crypto, it doesn't matter whether it's fiat. I would argue, I mean, the clever thing about Bitcoin is we can trace it. So we can actually see where it's come from. So I'd almost argue that it's possible to create protocols that have a hygiene footprint associated with them, and we can see the degrees of separation that exist between a particular transaction and some bad things that have happened. So you could almost create like closed loops where we actually have a full hygiene profile associated with the the way that money has been used. So I think the risks will be greater because there's going to be a lot more of it. But I also think if it's, we're going to have the travel rule that's going to come through.
Yep.
I think if we do this properly, we can actually, create environments where the risk is lessened by correct use of the technology.
And talking a little bit about rules and regulations in the metaverse, do you think the current regulatory environment we have, particularly for financial services, is it, but also for data, because we talked about data and data protection, and when you think about some of the things we would be doing in the metaverse, including, training surgeons, I think you mentioned, and my sister is actually a doctor in this country, and in her specialty, they will be receiving training in the metaverse. That's anesthetics. So do you think the regulatory environment we have today, is it fit for purpose for the metaverse? And if it isn't, well, what needs to change?
So it's already trying to play catch up, and people talk about, just in social media, people talk about the risks to young people, mental health, and all of this gets exponentialized in the metaverse. And where it becomes more complicated is in the sort of borderless nature that this could take. So we've already seen on some of the central platforms, like on Facebook stuff, where people have had to put in place boundaries so you can't sort of upskirt people and all this sort of thing. And we thought that was the sensible thing to do in our culture. In other cultures, just maybe interacting with people of the other sex in the wrong way may be considered and misconstrued. So how this is going to work in an international way will be really tricky. How do you actually start to look after people? So coming back to some of the more metaverse type ideas around avatars and things like this. So it may be that I find it easier to express myself through an avatar than I do IRL or in real life. And I may have more than one avatar because I might have a persona to talk about crypto with my crypto degens. I might have a persona to talk about politics because who isn't these days in the UK? And then I have one, to handle my corporate life. So all of a sudden, that has an impact on probably my mental well-being because I've got to manage almost 3 different versions of myself. So you've got this whole aspect around actually what does it mean to be who you are. It comes back then to that credibility of your AML. Is this my avatar or myself that's doing the interaction? How do I build up that credibility in that individual? And so that then plays through into the financial side as well. Who is doing those financial transactions? Do I want to be pseudonymous? Do I want to be fully anonymous? Do I want to be fully doxed? There's a sort of scale of these things and how that privacy works through. So in many ways, it comes back to what Pavel was saying. I need to be the owner of my own data. I need to decide how I'm going to do that. And these decisions have consequences. So I may not be able to buy what I want to buy if I want to remain fully anonymous because it goes above a certain value and it crosses the travel rule. So these actions have consequences. We don't live in a lawless society. It may give people more responsibility, and they need to think through what they behave with that greater responsibility.
I think the regulatory environment is going to become very, very complex in the metaverse, particularly if you're talking about avatars and if these avatars are to have legal personas. Exactly. And will we need to add them to our wills, for example? What happens when you die in real life? What happens to the avatar? Does it go on living and doing things? And how is that somehow captured in regulation? We were just having a chat about this before I went on stage. So I think things are going to be very tricky. But on the topic of regulation, let me ask you another question and actually flip it. Do you think rules and regulation currently, as they are now, are they hindering the development of the metaverse? Is there anything there that's a particular problem?
I think there's a couple of things there. I think first off, if anybody has the appetite, it's worth downloading the Law Commission consultation on reforms to allow digital assets to be supported more properly. because I think it's a 547-page document, okay?
Light reading.
Okay.
Longer than our report.
And the thing is, I'm conscious of time, but the thing is, because the law sits right at the bottom, okay? That's over a 500-page document around reforming the law to support this technology in a manner which is better. And that's just digital assets, okay? The second thing, and this is quite interesting, is back to radio. There are very few global regulators. One of the few global regulators is the International Telecommunications Union, and that was established when the nations of the world realized that radio is actually quite clever and used the term borderless, and we need a borderless regulator, okay? So I think and I was talking to the gentleman from Convex earlier, and I made the point that I think G20, G7 countries will come together and they will create a global regulator similar to the ITU that will reference standard packages of law and regulation that will allow the interoperability to be more effective and allow this technology to really blossom.
And I'm just conscious of time, but I'll just ask one last question that we've received from Slido, and it's made its way all the way to the top. And again, it's a very relevant question, one that I've been asked many times. Why didn't it work last time? Why didn't the metaverse work last time? I guess they're referring to maybe like AR, VR. We've been there, we've done that. It didn't work.
So it depends what you mean. Do you mean that? Do you mean these sort of EverQuest or Second Life type attempts at building these persistent elements? Do we mean, a bit like, Apple tried the Newton, they then tried the iPad. Was it just not ready for prime time? I think it's a mixture of these things. I think having the mobile phone now has made a big difference to a lot of this. And I also think, as we've been talking a lot about, I think Web3 it will make a big difference to this, because we don't need that centralized dystopian future. We can at least start to envisage, with a bit of hope and fingers crossed, a more decentralized future which allows individuals to be more sovereign over their data.
Thank you. Anything else to add, or shall we wrap up?
I mean, Second Life was fun, but it was, the experience was fairly sort of simple, simplistic in some ways, because it was screen based. I think we've got to solve the problem of creating an experience which is simple and immersive and dynamic, which doesn't require me to strap something big on my face. So, and I think we're getting there from a technology perspective.
It looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was about to say, I do agree with the point that Web3 was missing last time, so that's why Metaverse failed before all previous attempts. So we're getting closer with Web3. I think it's still early days, but hopefully it will change how we interact.
Well, thank you so much for your comments and for your insights. I could keep going all afternoon and all of tomorrow and the days to come, because there's an awful lot to unpack there from multiple perspectives, even from a philosophical perspective. But that's all we have time for now. I think this topic is going to be with us for quite some time. And thank you to our audience for your kind attention.